I felt like my head was about to blow up as I staggered out of bed. I gulped down 2 aspirin as soon as I got to the bathroom. I hung by the toilet for 10 minutes or so because I felt like my stomach was about to explode. It all came back to me in that time. My name is Ron Jameson, and yesterday, my devoted wife Chrissy took me by surprise when I got home from work. She told me she loved me at first, but then she told me she had been seeing another man for the previous year and that she was in love with him. She added that it was just a straightforward act of kindness. The man, whose name she would not reveal, had been involved in a horrific vehicle crash in which his wife had perished, but he had escaped unharmed. He was extremely sorry for this. Chrissy clarified that they had fallen in love after she initially tried to assist him in overcoming his emotional suffering. She acknowledged that they had had sex. Chrissy went so far as to say that she occasionally had excellent sex. Of course, she told me she loved me and would come back to me at some point during this whole nightmare of a conversation. But she would be there for this man for as long as he needed her. She gave me her word that she would support both me and our children. She knew that eventually the man, who was much younger than her, would move on. But she wanted to be there for him, however long he needed her. Any married man's worst nightmare was about to come true. I was so stunned that I did the most common thing a man would do. I called my wife a hooker and a 304. That's when Chrissy opened up to me. She expressed her complete disappointment in my response to her. Chrissy actually dared to tell me that I would accept the situation if I truly loved her. She informed me that I had vowed to love, respect, and cherish her in our wedding vows. Chrissy was obviously upset and disappointed with me. I started drinking and yelling because I was so angry that I wanted to avoid hitting her. I asked her how she would feel if I started seeing other women after I had calmed down a little. "Who would want you?" Chrissy asked, describing me as a middle-aged, overweight man with thinning hair. She also threatened to ruin me if I attempted to get a divorce from her. I was furious beyond belief and utterly clueless about what action to take. My mind was totally out of control at that precise moment. I was incapable of reasoning through anything. It was probably not my best moment, but I kept drinking and getting mad at Chrissy. She said she was going to her lover and packed her bag, waiting for me to cool down and accept the situation. After that, I didn't remember much. I made the decision to take stock as I sat on my bed, our bed. Chrissy was accurate. I had to admit that, in addition to being middle-aged and having thinning hair, I was also about 20 pounds overweight. I knew there was something I could do about the weight and the hair, but there was nothing I could do about getting older. However, I needed to find out where my kids were before taking any action. As it was Saturday morning, they ought to be at home by now. They weren't, as a cursory inspection of the house revealed. In what location did Chrissy hide them? Just as I was ready to give her parents a call, I heard a car arrive in the driveway. Looking out the window, I saw that it was Chris's vehicle. Our children were coming out and making their way toward the house. Chrissy and I met at the front door. She snapped, "Good, I see you're sober," in her voice. "Where were the kids?" I snapped in my question. "They were with me. I couldn't very well leave the kids with you. You didn't take them to your lover's house, did you?" I yelled. She yelled, "Ron, watch your language," once more. She stated, "They were already there," as if it were a given. My friend is a wonderfully kind person. You, on the other hand, were disgraceful yesterday. I wouldn't dare have left them with you. You have a point about me, I said. But why didn't you take the kids to your parents' place? Chrissy said they weren't home as she walked right past me and upstairs. I went into our bedroom after her. "Are you here to stay, or are you going running back to your lover?" I responded. "Oh, please, Ron, stop being so childish. I told you how things are going to be. I have no intention of arguing with you about it. The discussion is over. Accept it or don't, that's your choice. Even though you're acting like an idiot, I still love you. And as I told you, when he no longer needs me, I'll be back full time. So, what do we do now?" I was struggling to remain composed. Right now, I'm going to pack a few things because I'm going to spend a few days with my friend until you finally cool down and accept the situation. What about the kids? I thought that might shame her into staying. It didn't. If you don't want to watch them, call my parents. I'm sure they will. After packing another bag of clothes, Chrissy departed. My head felt like it was about to blow up. But I knew I had to hold myself together for the children. However, I refused to accept Chris's extramarital affair. No man worth his salt would. I went to see how the kids were doing and inquired about homework after Chrissy departed. Each of the three claimed to have done so. I told them to start working on it immediately. When I told them we'd head over to Pop and Grammy's house once they were done, they let out a lot of groans. They are the parents of Chrissy. Every child applauded. Pop was building go-karts with all three of my kids, so they loved going there. For several months, they had been working on them intermittently. The karts needed to be nearly completed. Sam and Mary, Chris's parents, were located roughly 15 minutes away on a small farm. Sam simply loved to tinker, and they were both retired. He enjoyed building and fixing things, as well as farming a little. When time allowed, they worked on the karts in his spacious workshop, which he utilized for all his projects. I'd be willing to help. For the nearby Ford dealership, I work as a certified dealer mechanic. In the Tri-County area, it is the biggest dealership. In order to find out if Chris's parents were aware of her boyfriend, and, more importantly, who he was, I wanted to speak with her parents. In addition, I wanted their opinion on what course of action to take. I'd always had a wonderful rapport with them. Because my parents were 3 states away, Sam and Mary became my adoptive parents. I was a little nervous, though, because I thought they would side with Chrissy in this whole mess. That would completely ruin our friendship. I proceeded from room to room to make sure the children were completing their homework, and they were. That's when it really hit me, how much my children mean to me. Ron, who was 16, was the oldest. Ron, as only the close family called him. In order to prevent confusion about whether Chrissy was speaking to her son or me, we started that. Despite being a talented football player, he wasn't large enough to receive a college scholarship. Sally was an ordinary teenager, a year younger. She was an excellent student but also enjoyed pushing the envelope. The baby, Kyle, was only 11. Even though he detested the term baby, Chrissy would still use it. A happy accident was Kyle. When Chrissy found out she was pregnant, we had no intention of having any more children, but Kyle had been such a happy, carefree kid that he was a pleasure to have around. I poured myself a cup of coffee and began to make a list while the kids worked upstairs. I didn't know how much time I would have, and I had a lot of work to do. I started by giving my boss, Bob B. Clarkson, a call and explaining my situation. Bob had been my manager for at least 15 years, and I had been employed by the dealership since its founding 23 years ago. I was one of the better mechanics at the dealership, if I may say so myself. Bob listened to my sorry story and showed great empathy because his son had gone through a difficult divorce the previous year. The situation had escalated to such an extent that Carol, the ex-wife of his son, accused him of abusing their daughter. "Oh my God," I exclaimed. "That is one witch." "Tell me about it," Bob said, clearly resentful. It was touch and go for about a week. We expected the police to arrest Gary at any minute. These are the kind of accusations that are devastating and almost impossible to disprove. And the police run scared every time a woman starts pointing the finger at a man. The only thing that saved Gary was his ex-mother-in-law. When Carol told her mother that Gary had molested her granddaughter, I think she thought that would be the final nail in Gary's coffin. Everyone knows Bev is ruthless. What I didn't know was that she has an equal share of fairness. She immediately took her granddaughter out of preschool and took her to her general practitioner. Bev had the doctor examine her granddaughter to determine if she had been molested. The doctor stated unequivocally that there was no way her granddaughter had been molested. Armed with that information, Bev marched over to the police department and told them if they pursued charges against Gary, she would testify against her daughter. Then Bev told Carol that if she pursued this course of action, she would tell the court about her drug problems and she'd lose her daughter. God bless Bev, I replied, somewhat taken aback by the news. Able to do to get their way. Amen to that, Bob answered back. So if there is anything I can do to help you, let me know, Ron. If it's within my power to make it happen, I will. Since I had 12 personal days and 6 weeks of vacation time accrued, I asked for the following week off. Bob readily agreed, and in fact, he told me if I needed to take all of my personal days and my vacation together, he'd work it out for me. As it turned out, that is precisely what I did. I said, there's something else you can do to help. I need the name of a good divorce lawyer if you know one. That's simple, he replied. Use the attorney my son used. He cleaned Carol's clock. Gary got primary custody of their daughter, gets to live in the house, and Carol has to pay child support. His name is Dwight Tucker. I think I still have his number here somewhere. It took Bob a minute to locate Dwight Tucker's card with the number. The messier my son's divorce got, the more we communicated through lawyers, and it got to the point where I started hearing Mr. Tucker's name in my sleep. I gave the lawyer's office a call. On a Saturday, I didn't think anyone would be there, so I thought I would leave a message. However, I was in luck because Mr. Tucker was not only present, but his secretary also informed me that he had to cancel. If I could get to the office in half an hour, he would see me. I told the kids that I had to behave and go out for about an hour. After that, I got in my car and drove for 20 minutes to get to Mr. Tucker's office. It looked like Dwight Tucker was in his early or mid-30s. He was a handsome man, a few inches smaller than I was. He had a warm smile and eyes the color of deep blue. I was confident that Dwight had won the woman juror. I sat down in a chair and Dwight said, "What can I do for you today?" I said, blushing with shame and rage, "My wife told me yesterday that she is cheating on me with a younger man." I gave a brief summary of what had happened the day before. I told Dwight that my wife claimed to still love me, but she was going to continue having affairs with this guy, and he sat there taking notes and shaking his head. I was stopped by him. Dwight's eyes had grown a little dark. Let me get this straight, my face flushed a deep shade of shame. Your wife says she loves you but is going to keep screwing this poor lost soul? All I did was nod. Dwight nodded. Okay, go ahead. I continued by saying that Chrissy had become upset with me because I had rejected her plan. I also acknowledged calling her a hooker and a 304. I explained, painfully, that Chrissy had laughed at my question about what she would think if I went out and got a woman. Admitting how Chrissy made fun of me for being a man and assured me that I would never be able to find a woman who would want me was very hurtful and embarrassing. Furthermore, she threatened to ruin me if I attempted to get a divorce from her. Did she really tell you all that? Dwight questioned in an unbelieving tone of voice. No offense, Mr. Fremont, but your wife is either one of the most callous persons ever, or she has some serious mental issues. None taken, I sighed, I think so myself. Then I told him that she had left the kids overnight at her lover's house after our argument yesterday, and Dwight's head snapped up for a brief moment before smiling and putting his head down to write something. All right, let's get to the $64,000 question. What would you like to do? Dwight looked up, curled his fingers, and asked. After giving it some thought, I said, I can't live with the situation as it is. I'm not sure if I can move past this, but I know that I don't want to lose my children or be ruined in a divorce. That seems to be the new manner with women who are facing divorce because of their bad behavior, Dwight said, shaking his head sympathetically. But don't worry, I'll bust my butt to stop her from doing too much harm to you. You will receive at least 50% of your joint assets in the event of a divorce. I will caution you that adultery will not be tolerated by the courts, and you will be required to pay child support and alimony. Much deflated, I said. It seemed like I was going to be taken to the cleaners, even though Dwight had assured me otherwise. Yes, that is a potential outcome. Dwight looked over his notes, but that's why we have to strike now and strike hard. Your wife has left your marital home, and worse than that, she took your kids to her lover's place and left them unsupervised. That's strictly forbidden in certain courts. Your children are currently under your custody, and I believe we can maintain that arrangement. I'm going to attempt to obtain an emergency restraining order against your wife so that you can stay in the house for the time being. Additionally, your case for primary custody gets stronger the longer you stay there. We won't require you to pay child support if we can obtain that. Is your spouse employed? Dwight inquired. Yes, I work at the hospital part-time. I replied, yes, Chrissy works a shift on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. That's probably where she met this bozo. Suddenly, I had an idea. After agreeing, White inquired, what is her salary? I clarified that her annual salary was roughly $25,000. In contrast, I earned roughly $80,000. Dwight turned to face me and spoke, I have to ask you a very important question, and I want you to really consider it. Do you still love her? Would you like to attempt to resolve the issue? I lowered my head and gazed at the ground for an extended period of time. I couldn't stop the tears that were streaming down my face when I looked up. I nodded and continued, saying, I love her, but I can't live with the way things are right now. She broke her vows and insulted her husband. She is no longer with me. All I want is a divorce. As best you can, tell me what assets you guys have, Dwight said, turning the sheet of paper on his pad to reveal a clean one. I took a moment to mentally list all of our assets before I responded. As a rough estimation, we have about $3,500 in our checking account. In addition, we have a CD worth $220,000 plus interest and $44,000 in a savings account. I also mentioned that my 401k held roughly $150,000. Chris's retirement plan balance was marginally lower than it was during her full-time employment at the hospital. I explained that the benefits package at the hospital was generally better than mine, even though she hadn't worked as long as I had. Surprisingly, though, my employer provided a better healthcare plan, so we decided to use it for the family. After giving it some thought, I said that we had 2 cars registered in our names. Naturally, we had our own home. But this particular house was only purchased a few years ago, and we had paid off the loan in full. It lacked a lot of equity. Okay, here's what I want you to do. Dwight looked like a man ready to go into battle. The first thing is for you to go draw out 1/2 of what you have in savings, checking, and the CD. Then I want you to put that money into a separate account in your name only. I can't do anything with the CD because it's in both our names, I explained. I can't cash that in without Chris's signature. No problem, Dwight said as he began running numbers on his calculator. Take $33,750 out of the savings account. Then pay as many bills for your house as you can from the checking account. Cancel any joint credit cards you have and use the joint checking account to pay them off. Then, apply for a new credit card in your name only. I still have a credit card that I got before we were married, I said. However, I don't use it much because our joint card gives us money back. Even better, Dwight smiled. You won't have to apply for a new card. Dwight quickly scribbled onto a notepad a list of instructions and handed it to me. Right now, I want you to go out to my secretary and tell her to call Taylor Locksmith for you. Give them the address and have all the locks changed in your house. Then come back in here and I'll fill you in on our next steps. Miss Carlson had Taylor Locksmith on the phone quickly, and I gave them the address. They told me they'd be out around noon. I then went back into Dwight Tucker's office. Dwight was just getting off the phone when I sat down. We're in luck. According to the clerk, if I fax my paperwork in today, we'll be assigned Judge Johnson. Why is that lucky? I asked, confused. He hates cheaters, Dwight answered with a smile. He's an old-fashioned Bible Belt judge, and he hates spouses that cheat, be they men or be they women. Trust me, that works big in our favor. If he hadn't been available, I probably would have had to do a little more tap dancing, but I'm sure we would have gotten what we want. However, Judge Johnson was a good friend of my father's. I know for sure he won't be pissed if I call him at home. Dwight stood up at that point and offered me his hand. I shook it gratefully. Before you head home, Dwight instructed me, I want you to head out and get your bank stuff done. I'm going to prepare a petition for an emergency restraining order on your wife. She won't be permitted in your house or within 500 feet of you or your children. She's currently staying with her lover, and we know she's left your kids with him. That should help greatly with the restraining order. Weeks or months down the road, the order might be kicked out, but by then, you should be firmly established in the family residence as the primary caregiver. By Friday, I'll have your wife served with divorce papers. Then we're going to have to sit back and see what your wife wants to do. For the first time since Chrissy had laid her little bomb on me, I felt like I had taken back my life and part of my dignity. The bank wasn't particularly busy, so I was able to get a cashier's check quickly for my share of the money and close our one joint credit card. They told me there was a balance of $537 on it. I paid the balance off from the checking account. Then I paid the mortgage 2 months ahead. That took up another $2,600. There wasn't much left in the checking account. With a cashier's check in hand, I went down the street to another bank and opened up a checking and savings account in my name only. With that done, I headed back home. When I got there, I found the kids watching television, so I loaded them into the car. When we rolled up to my in-laws, I saw Sam coming around the corner of his house from his workshop. He waved and headed back around the house. The kids piled out and headed after their grandfather. Once inside, Mary greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. A minute later, Sam came in, and after washing his hands, he came out to greet me. "I'm sorry I have to tell you this," I apologized immediately. "This is hard for me to say." I took a deep breath and continued, "Chrissy is having an affair, and I'm filing for a divorce." "I don't believe you," Sam said sharply. "Chrissy isn't the type of woman." "What proof do you have?" he told me. I said softly as tears started to slide down my face. At that point, the back door opened, and the kids came trooping in. "Please stay outside for a few minutes," I told the children. "Why?" Ron asked. "Because I'm telling you to," I said more sharply than I meant to. At that point, Ron saw the tears on my face, and he turned immediately, pushing his siblings back out the door. "She told you?" Mary asked in disbelief. "Yes," I said firmly, "and a whole lot more." I then recounted the story of the previous evening, including the part where she was having sex and it was good. Also, I told them about how she said to me, if I divorced her, she'd ruin me, and finally, I recounted how she didn't think any other woman would want me. They were shocked, and Sam was angry. "I still don't believe it." "I'm going to call her and put the call on speakerphone," Sam said. After dialing his daughter's number and activating the speaker, Sam put the phone on the coffee table. "Hey, Daddy," Chrissy answered brightly, "what can I do for you?" "Ron is here right now," Sam said and immediately asked the question, "Are you having an affair?" There was a long pause, then Chrissy demanded, "What did he say?" "He said you were having sex with another man and that you were in love with this guy." "It's complicated, Daddy," she pleaded. "I'm trying to help this man. He suffered a terrible tragedy, and I'm trying to help him." Sam's face got bright red, and through gritted teeth, he asked, "Are you having sex with him or not?" "We've had sex, but I still love Ron. I just can't abandon this man right now." "I love him also," Chrissy said. I was totally stunned by Chris's father. She had always been a daddy's girl, and I just assumed that Sam would make excuses for her. Chris's voice was a bit strangled at this point. "I never thought my daughter would ever become an immoral woman, Daddy, please," was all that was heard as Sam pushed the disconnect button. A moment or two later, the phone began to ring again, and Mary went to answer it. "Leave it alone," Sam commanded, but Mary snatched it up and tried to answer anyway. Sam grabbed the phone out of her hand and threw it against the fireplace. "I said leave it alone," he screamed at his wife. She was totally shocked by her husband's anger and backed up. I was even more shocked. Dead silence filled the room as Sam and Mary were trying to process what they had just learned. Finally, Sam came over to me and hugged me. "Ron, I am so sorry. I don't even know what to say." I can't believe our daughter has done this to you. Anything that we can do to help you, we will, and I mean anything at all. We will be there for you and the kids. I'll have Mary talk to our daughter later and let you know how that comes out. Right now, I'm too angry to talk to her. After that, I had to leave so I could get back to the house for the locksmith. After herding the kids into my car, I hugged Sam and Mary and invited them for dinner, where we could talk more about my problem. On the way home, Sally burst into tears. Are you and Mom getting a divorce? Where did you hear that? I demanded. From me, Ron said defiantly. I snuck back into the house and listened. I figured it was something bad, I just didn't figure it was that. I sighed and realized they had a right to know what was going on, but then the question was how to tell my kids about their mother without causing too much damage. Damn Chrissy, her selfishness was hurting the kids. I bet she never thought about that when she was climbing into bed with her new man. Unfortunately, it seems that your mother and I will be getting a divorce, I said softly. But why? Kay asked as he started to cry. Your mother has fallen in love with another man, I said simply. You mean she's having sex with another man? Sally said between her tears. I hate her, she's a total witch. Sally, don't say that about your mother, I admonished my daughter, but my words were hollow as those were my exact feelings right now. The locks were changed, and none too soon. 10 minutes after the locksmith van left, Chrissy came roaring into the driveway. You had to tell my parents, didn't you? I'm sure that you told them that I'm a 304 and a hooker, Chrissy screamed. I thought you loved me, Chrissy, I said sadly. I do love you with all my heart, but I will never accept that you're going to be screwing some other guy. You have no idea how much you hurt me when you told me that I was just an ugly middle-aged guy that no other woman would ever want to be with. In essence, you told me you're doing me a favor by staying with me, your pity love I can do without. Not only did you do that, but you threatened to ruin me, yet you dare to tell me you love me. You really need to take a good hard look at yourself, Chrissy. People who love each other don't do things like that. As for telling your parents, I continued, if you're so convinced that what you're doing is right, then it shouldn't matter that your parents know. Chrissy looked stricken after I laid my accusations on her. Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say those things, she tried to apologize. I was just angry at the moment because you called me a 304 and a hooker. Truly, Ron, to call your wife and the mother of your children those names, you promised to love, honor, and cherish me. Shame on you. If you truly loved me, you would accept the situation. I'm not leaving you for him. I just love him also, and I'm trying to help him. He's much younger than me and will eventually move on. Chrissy, I said, shaking my head slowly, if you're going to quote our wedding vows, you should include the part where you promised to forsake all others. And to remind you, a married woman does not go out opening her legs for young men just because they're hurt. Besides, I have accepted the situation that you were damaged goods, and I am not going to have you in my life anymore. Like you said, accept it or don't. That's your choice. Chrissy turned red and seemed uncertain at that moment. Then her eyes narrowed, and the arrogance was back. She was breathing hard, and I figured she was trying to figure out her next argument on why I should accept the situation. At that moment, I wished to God that I had no love for her at all, but I still loved her deeply. Look, Ron, Chrissy said with a tone that she used with the children when she wanted them to behave, stop being an idiot. I'm your wife. You know me. I love you, and I will come back to you when this man is well again. I was so sad, but I had enough. My love for her died and was now replaced by pure hatred. No, Chrissy. I don't know you. My wife and the mother of my children was a warm and loving person who would never cheat on me. You are a person I don't know. For all I know, this is just one of many affairs that you've had over the years. I can't be sure of anything about you anymore. Who knows if you are regularly opening your legs for every Tom, Dick, and Harry who is hurt? Chris's eyes narrowed, and her face flushed. I could tell that she was furious at this moment and about to explode. This is not an affair, and this is the first person that I've ever had sex with since we were married. This man has been badly hurt, and I am going to help him whether you agree or not. Suit yourself. I don't want this and will never accept this. Not only that, but because I no longer trust anything about you, I intend to have a DNA test done on the kids to make sure that they really are mine, you total a-hole, Chrissy spit out at me. I can see that you intend to make this into something very ugly. Just remember what I told you will happen if you try to divorce me. I would rather die in poverty alone than ever be with a woman who has no morals, I said, looking down from the porch at my wife. I shook my head. I could take very little solace from the fact that she had no idea of the storm that was probably going to descend on her. I think that she had convinced herself that she could have her cake and eat it too, and there would be no consequences. It was at this time that the sheriff's vehicle pulled up. The deputy got out of his car and approached Chrissy. "Are you Chrissy Jameson?" or the deputy asked. "Yes, I am," Chrissy responded with confusion. This is a restraining order," the deputy handed her the court order. "It says that you cannot go into that house and you have to stay 500 feet away. Do you understand?" "But that's my home," Chrissy sputtered. "All my things are inside." "I'll allow you 15 minutes in the house to gather your stuff." The deputy looked up at me and I nodded. "Mr. Jameson will stay out here, officer." "I'd rather take my children out in the backyard, if that's all right," I asked. "But I want to see my children," Chrissy was frantic by now. The deputy was getting nervous that this situation was about to get out of hand. "The reason for the restraining order is to protect specifically your children from you." Chrissy wheeled around with anger in her eyes. "You did this. You're trying to take my children away from me." "No, Chrissy, you did this," I said calmly. "I simply informed the court that you had abandoned our house and left our children unattended at your lover's house." "I didn't abandon our house," Chrissy screamed, "and he's a wonderful man. He's just someone I'm trying to help by sleeping with him. If he is so wonderful, why don't you go and live with him? Give him your love for the rest of your life. Or does he only want to use your glory hole for cheap pleasure?" I responded, more for the deputy's benefit than my wife's. I took the kids to the backyard and told them that their mother was gathering her stuff to take to her new man's house, but I would let them see her before she left. I did not get any pleasure out of the meeting between Chrissy and the children. C was crying so hard when I took them back out front, he rushed into his mother's arms and wept bitterly, begging her not to leave. "Please, Ron," Chrissy sobbed, "can't you see what you're doing to the children?" I felt my anger rising, but I controlled it and said to her, "Don't talk about the kids," using a cool voice. "Ron, why can't you realize that I can't leave him? I haven't done anything to the kids. You were the one who brought them to your lover's house and forced them stay there while you drilled your sex toy," Chrissy said while shedding copious tears. "Chrissy, you must have given it a lot of thought before we had that awkward conversation yesterday. I know you can't leave him, so stay with him. You've already abandoned your husband, your children, and your house. It's time we did the same for you. I suppose that throughout all of your deliberations, you never gave the consequences of your choice any thought, but now you're starting to realize those consequences. I wish you happiness." Ronron asked his mother why Chrissy was fumbling to explain what she was doing to her kid, while Ronron just stood there staring at her. I had to hold my daughter because I felt she may strike Chrissy. Sally really let her mother have it. "You're nothing but a selfish witch," she shouted, spitting in her mother's face. Ronron listened, but it was obvious that he didn't believe any of it yet. I also insisted that she issue an apology. Sally declined outright. Though I wasn't entirely surprised by my daughter's behavior, Sally and Chrissy had been going through a difficult time lately and appeared to be growing closer. It seemed like the typical teenage rebellious stage that I assumed Sally would outgrow. Now, all I could hope for was that Chrissy hadn't ruined her relationship with her daughter as I held Sally. Chrissy got up and bolted to her car. I saw her thrashing the steering wheel angrily, and I tried to chase after her, yelling, "Mommy, please don't leave us." When Ronron managed to capture him and bring him back, the deputy gave me a somber expression. Mr. Jameson, that evening, Sam and Mary came over for dinner. I had planned to grill some hamburgers and make salad, but Mary chased me out of the kitchen and made me her famous macaroni and cheese, which the kids loved. While Mary was cooking, Sam and I sat in the living room with a few beers. Sam was clearly upset about what his daughter was doing, so I explained to him about the restraining order and that I had obtained it because Chrissy had left the kids unattended at her lover's house, which made Sam even more upset. About an hour after you left, Mary chatted with Chrissy, and Sam eventually said, "How did that go?" "I hope it went horribly wrong." As you can expect, the meal was very subdued. The only bright spot was when Sam invited the kids over to work on their go-karts the following day, which at least made Ron and Kyle smile. Sam admitted that Mary tried to reason with Chrissy to no avail. "Chrissy is convinced she is right and we are all wrong. She thinks we're horrible people." That's when Mary got angry, really angry. I've never seen her that angry before. The conversation ended when Mary told her daughter not to call us anymore. Sally didn't eat anything and simply sat there looking angry, but I chose to overlook it. The next Friday, Chrissy received divorce papers at the hospital. I heard from friends who worked there that Chrissy completely lost it and swore at the process server, vowing to ruin me. Eventually, they sent her home, or more accurately, to her lover's house. Chrissy then hired her own attorney, Amber Wright, whom Dwight had previously faced off against on multiple occasions. Dwight said that Amber Wright was not nearly as good as she thought she was. "I think she was hurting almost as much as I was." Amber tried to have the restraining order lifted right away, but Judge Johnson was unsupportive. He stated that the kids were safe at the moment and that he would only change the order. Chrissy was informed that she could visit the house under supervision, but her boyfriend was not permitted to be within 500 feet of the house at all. He also threatened to revoke her visitation rights if she disobeyed the order. After the hearing, the DNA results arrived in the mail. It took me almost 2 days to summon the courage to open it and read the report. Chrissy was ecstatic about the modification for herself, but her happiness was short-lived. The judge then ordered Chrissy to start paying child support, and the amount he had meant that she was going to have to go back to work full-time even with her blow-up at the hospital. I knew they would take her on full-time because there was always a shortage of nurses besides her excellent nursing. When I considered whether I would be willing to forgive everything for the benefit of my children if Chrissy would just leave that man and return home, I realized that no matter what, I would always love them the same. She was a bad influence, so I needed to keep her away from my children. When my personal days and vacation time ran out, I utilized them all to be at home with the kids. Unfortunately, Chris's parents were ready to watch them. Sam and Mary were still refusing to talk to their daughter until she came to her senses, Sam said. She called 3 or 4 times a day for about a week, then Sam blocked her number. The visitation schedule was left up to Chrissy and me to work out. Actually, that meant that our attorneys would communicate what we wanted. Finally, it was agreed that Chrissy could visit Monday, Wednesday, and Friday between 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the evening. Mary volunteered to supervise. However, I insisted that I be there for the first visit. I wanted Chrissy and Mary also to know precisely what the rules would be. On the first Monday, a car parked in the street, and Chrissy got out. I didn't recognize the car, but quickly realized that it must be her lover's car. Chrissy walked up to the house nervously and smiled tentatively at us both. "Hello, Ron. How are you, Mother?" "It's good to see you," Chrissy said. "You have to leave," I snapped at her. "The judge told you that your lover wasn't allowed within 500 feet of this house." Horror spread over her face. But he was just dropping me off." "Chrissy, are you brain dead or what?" I was furious. The judge was quite clear, no lover here. "Tell that a-hole to leave now, and I won't tell the judge." Chrissy nodded quickly and started back toward the car. Then a thought struck me. I walked out at an angle and pulled a pin from my pocket. As Chrissy was talking to her lover, I copied the license plate number down. Then I returned to the porch as the car drove off. "Okay," he said, "he'll come back and pick me up. Chrissy, tell him to meet you down the street because I don't want him anywhere near the house." Chris's face filled with anger. "Ron, I'm really getting tired of how you're treating me. You didn't have to steal the money from our checking account or cancel my credit card. Chrissy, I didn't steal anything. The money that was taken from the checking account was used to pay off the credit card and then 2 mortgage payments. I wanted to be sure the kids had a place to stay while we sorted our situation out. As to cancelling the credit card, I didn't want to be stuck with any expenses you might charge while you're running around with your lover. Chris's face flushed red with, I assumed, anger and arrogance. This is not an affair, and he isn't my lover, Ron. You're being an a-hole. Before I could say anything, Mary stepped forward and slapped Chrissy across the face. I was as stunned as Chrissy. Chrissy stepped back and stared at her mother, bewildered. Chrissy, if you ever disrespect Ron again, I will tear that dress off you and beat your bum red. Now, if you want to see the kids, they're in the living room. I want a word with Ron, and then I'll be in. But be forewarned, if you do or say anything wrong, I will bodily throw you out of this house. Chrissy nodded meekly and went inside. Ron, I apologize for my brain-dead daughter, Mary said sympathetically. Thanks for sticking up for me, I said with real gratitude. And then I left. 2 weeks after that first hearing, as Dwight had mentioned, the restraining order was lifted. But by that time, I had established that I was the primary caregiver and was allowed to stay in the house. Since Chrissy was still seeing her lover, her child support remained, but she now could have unsupervised visits with the children in public. However, the judge admonished her that she couldn't take them to her lover's house, and he couldn't be with her when she had the kids. After 4 months of delay, our first real day in court to finalize the divorce came up. Before either of our attorneys could say a word, Judge Johnson asked if Chrissy or I had been to any counseling. The 2 attorneys admitted that there had been none, so the judge requested 8 sessions of marital counseling. Neither Chrissy nor I opposed the sessions. For me, I thought they were a waste of time, but I didn't want to piss off the judge. On the other hand, I couldn't help but feel that Chrissy still believed that she could convince me or maybe the therapist that what she was doing was right. The first meeting with the therapist, Dr. Patterson, proved to be precisely what I thought it would be. Chrissy spent most of the hour trying to explain that what she was doing was the Christian thing to do. I thought the therapist was going to swallow her eye teeth the first time Chrissy launched into her explanation. I believe it was Chris's arrogance that truly shocked me. In the second week, Dr. Patterson began gently probing Chris's arguments. She asked if she thought it would be fair if I went out and started having sex with a woman. I cringed, waiting for the attack on my manhood, but this time it wasn't going to fly. Chrissy didn't answer right away, but I didn't care. During the months that the divorce had dragged on, I had made some changes. I know it sounds vain, but when the woman you love tells you that you aren't good enough, you desperately want to prove her wrong. So I took the plunge and had hair transplant surgery. I didn't require a lot of it, but it still cost about $4,000. I was really back and forth about whether to have the hair procedure. I didn't know if I wanted to put up with the teasing. However, I was still using my vacation time, so I went for it. As near as I understood the procedure, my hair was buzz cut, then plugs were pulled out of the back of my head and planted in the front. I pretty much stayed in the house for the first week. My kids didn't know what to make of me and asked a bunch of questions. I just told them that it was a minor medical procedure. After about 10 days, I looked pretty much like my old self, and each week after that, the hair got longer and longer. After the procedure was mostly healed, I started an exercise routine. I also started to run. At first, I could only go about a half mile before I felt like my lungs would explode and my legs would collapse out from under me. Eventually, I got up to where I could run 10 miles. I also joined a gym. I changed the lunch and supper menu in our house so that we were all eating healthier. The kids glared at first because I cut out the fast foods, cookies, ice cream, pizza, and many other junk foods. However, I did some searching on the internet and found some fun foods to cook. They loved it when I surprised them with something new that also tasted great. Some of the concoctions didn't turn out so great, but we laughed about those, scrapped them into the garbage, and made sandwiches. As it turned out, my kids loved helping me in the kitchen. It became a real family thing. Aside from the pain that still burned in my heart because of Chris's betrayal, I was beginning to feel better and better about myself. In fact, the first day back at work, I got a real ego boost. I checked in at the office to see what they had scheduled for me, and the receptionist, Trudy, welcomed me back with a strange look. I thought she was going to give me grief about my new hair, but she didn't. "Welcome back, Ron," she chirped, and then her eyes started studying me. "There's something different about you." I blushed a little. "Oh, I've been on a diet. I've lost 18 pounds. I want to lose maybe another 5. She laughed and nodded. "Well, it really suits you. If I wasn't married, I'd be all over you." Thanks for the ego boost, but according to my wife, I'm just a middle-aged man with no sex appeal. So much so she's found herself a lover. I tried to make a joke out of it, but it came out flat. By now, everyone in the company knew about my plight. Storm clouds crossed over Trudy's eyes. "Chrissy is an idiot. Either that or she has a screw loose. You're a great guy, Ron, and there are plenty of women out there who would be thrilled to have you. Don't let Chrissy get in your head." That was the best shot in the arm I had gotten in months. Suddenly, I didn't feel like such a loser. I snapped back to the present WI and asked my wife again, "Chrissy, how would you feel if Ron had come home and told you that he was sleeping with another woman?" As I mentioned, I was waiting for Chrissy to attack my manhood, but she didn't. I did see her eyeing me during our first meeting. I guess she could no longer say that I had thinning hair and was overweight. That was another boost to my ego. Anyway, I just sat in my chair and waited as Chrissy seemed to be thinking about what to say. She couldn't very well say that I couldn't have another woman if she had another man. I guess if he was trying to help that woman get over some tragedy, she said with arrogance, I would be okay with it. What if he told you that he loved this woman and that the sex was very good? Again, I would accept it, Chrissy insisted. However, he would have to assure me that the children and I would be taken care of. The session continued on like that, with me trying to get Chrissy to see that her position was really ridiculous. But Chrissy refused to budge. As I feared, these sessions were just a waste of time. Chrissy was just going to use them to try to convince me that she was right. That was never going to happen, and as it was, the initial shock of what Chrissy was doing had begun to wear off. It's a funny thing about love, if it isn't nurtured, it begins to die. By the third week, something had changed. Chrissy came into the session much subdued and said little, mostly, she just listened. Whatever had changed, it had set Chrissy back a bit. Maybe she wasn't as arrogant now because Dr. Patterson was calmly and compassionately challenging her entire premise at every point. I also saw Chrissy checking me out when she didn't think I'd notice. I continued to work out and lost a few more pounds. I'd even begun doing a lot of work in the yard, which had given me a great tan. A couple of months before the therapy sessions had been ordered, I made another change. I was becoming dissatisfied with my job. Oh, I loved fixing cars, and not just the engines. I got tremendous satisfaction doing bodywork. I had been fixing old cars up since I was 14 years old. I could do it all. Now, I saw owning my own business as a means to being able to spend more time with my kids. I talked it over with Sam, and he agreed to help me. I wanted to set up my own shop and start building a business, but I couldn't just quit my job and do it. I didn't have the money to carry me until the business would sustain us, with staff before I could make a go of it. However, since Sam's farm was also in an industrial zone, he agreed to let me start my business in his workshop. Actually, Sam's tinkering shop had once been a barn for horses that he had converted. There was plenty of space for Sam and me if I got the business established. Sam agreed to lease me a piece of land on the road to build my own building. I spent time at work studying how they had things set up. The dealership was basically set up to handle a higher volume than I was anticipating. They did a little bodywork at the dealership location, but much of it was subbed out. With this in mind, I scaled down what I needed in the matter of tools and equipment. One thing for sure, I needed to build a paint booth. Sam was not only okay with that, but he actually helped me construct it. I spent the savings I had liberated from our joint savings, plus a small loan from Sam, to finance the venture. I began working part-time, mostly in the evenings and on the weekends. The kids would frequently come out to watch or even lend a hand, and it was entertaining. I had a great time showing Ron the ropes. Even Sally got her hands dirty and loved telling her girlfriends about her assistants painting a Corvette or changing out an engine. The boys at school found her more interesting as a result of that. Word of mouth brought me business, and before long, I was considering my options before going full-time. When I was informed that I would need to work through the weekend in order to complete some backup work, that decision really came to a head. I had to take care of my own customers, so I was unable to complete the task. When I went in to tell Bob that I couldn't work because I had commitments for my own business, I assumed I was going to lose my job. I peeked into Bob's office and said, "Got a minute, Bob?" Ron nodded and waved me in. "I'm glad you're working this weekend. We've got 44 cars coming in this Friday that have been sold and need to be gone over from top to bottom. We have to get them out by the end of the month." I felt a little uncomfortable when he said that. The majority of people are unaware that dealerships can receive special incentives from factories if they meet a monthly sales target for cars. They receive a bill reduction. The factory might offer a $45,000 savings to the owner if it were to say, "If you sell 300 vehicles this month, we'll take $150 off your cost." However, the dealer receives nothing if they only sell 299. The dealership took great pride in this. As soon as I said, "That's just it, Bob," I felt the perspiration start to run down my back. "I can't work this weekend. I sort of have started my own business on weekends, and I've got stuff I need to get done." "I'm sorry, Bob," I replied with resignation, "but if you can't work this weekend, I may have to let you go." "I understand, Bob," I replied with resignation, "but if you can't work this weekend, I may have to let you go. I just hope there are no hard feelings. I have been trying to build up a business of my own. I want to spend more time with my kids and make a little extra money for their college funds. I'll clean out my locker." It meant losing this position. For a while. Since I had removed Chrissy from my health insurance plan, the kids would need to be covered by hers. I was still optimistic that I could succeed. Nearly as much business as I was bringing in was being turned away. Bob saw me coming down the hall and motioned for me to come into his office. "I've got a deal for you, Ron," he exclaimed with enthusiasm. "If you will work this weekend, we'll reimburse you for any money you lose because your customers are unhappy." "No," I said with a sigh. I couldn't treat my clients that way. "Bob, don't give up." "I'm not finished," he said, moving a piece of paper across the desk. It was an agreement for an independent contractor. "I really need you this weekend. I also think you can convince your customers to wait a few days. If you can do that, and your shop passes our inspection, we'll hire you as an independent contractor to do some of our bodywork." I was taken aback but accepted the offer. I was essentially working at my business full-time after that weekend. If I wasn't busy and the dealership had an issue, I would occasionally go in. In addition, Mary agreed to handle my books, and Sam began working for me part-time. Working for the dealership, I was now earning more money than I had ever made before. My marriage stood as the only aspect of my life that remained dysfunctional. I wanted to end the counseling sessions after the fourth one. I didn't really give a damn about what Chrissy was doing with her new partner. Don't get me wrong, I was still getting hurt whenever I would stop and consider the reality that my wife was seeing someone else, but I wasn't doing so as frequently. We were in our fifth session when I made the decision to take the offensive. I reasoned that if I went after Chrissy hard enough, she might decide to end these pointless sessions. The most hurtful thing she had ever said to me was that I was simply too ugly to attract another woman, so I made the decision to confront her about it. I gave Chrissy a hard time when she asked if I had anything to say. "Chrissy, I've decided that you are not only a totally selfish person, but you're basically a very nasty person," I said with a sting. "How dare you tell the man you supposedly love that he is an ugly middle-aged man who no woman would ever want? You hurt me in a way that I don't think I'll ever get over." "Oh my God, Ron, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so ashamed that I ever said that." If I could take it back, I would. I do love you, just not enough to give up your lover. Keep your sorrows to yourself, you will need it more than I do, I replied. Chrissy started crying uncontrollably. Whatever I said, Chrissy would not calm down. Dr. Patterson eventually adjourned the session, but not before assigning us some homework to complete before the next one. As I had come to the conclusion that these sessions were a complete waste of time, I wasn't looking forward to it. There were only a few questions to answer as homework. Some of them, like our relationship with our parents and our sexual lives, I could understand. Some of the questions, like what my favorite food and drink were and what kind of car I drove, just didn't make sense to me. However, it was that one question that really made me stop and reflect. It was the question, if you could change one thing, what would it be? The night after the previous session, I had been working on this questionnaire, but after reading that question, I put it away. That one was something I wanted to consider further. I eventually wrote the following day, saying I wished I had been a better husband, so my wife wouldn't have given up on me. When we brought the papers in for our next appointment, Dr. Patterson chose not to even glance at them. Rather, she began by inquiring as to whether we had any questions or if there was anything we wanted to talk about. I turned to face my estranged wife and said, I'd like to ask Chrissy a question, to which she nodded. Chrissy, I don't see that we're getting anywhere with these sessions. You've made it consistently clear that you're not going to leave your friend Bruce Hartman, and that leaves no chance for reconciliation. Why don't we just stop this and get the divorce done? Chrissy questioned in disbelief, how do you know his name? That first time you came over to visit the kids, I got his license number. After that, it wasn't hard to find out his name. But it doesn't really matter. I have no interest in getting back at him or even talking to him. I just don't care anymore. I want to move on. Chrissy had the saddest eyes I've ever seen when she looked up at me. I wanted to go over and give her a hug because I hated seeing her like that, but I knew that wouldn't help, so I carried on. I know your lawyer hasn't been happy with the settlement I've offered so far. Well, I've told my attorney to offer some alternatives. I'm willing to give you more visitation with the kids. I'm also offering to pay you $1,000 a month in alimony for 3 years. I just want you out, at any cost. I looked to see if Chrissy would react, but all I saw was a deep, dark sadness. I could not and would not tolerate my wife having sex with another man. She had made it very clear to me that she was not going to stop seeing the guy. I could not for the life of me figure out how she could have believed that I could put up with such a situation. It made no difference at this stage. All I wanted was to be done. I took a stand to put an end to this farce. I know that what you said about me was partially true. It did hurt like hell when you said it, and I did tell you that I didn't think I'd ever get over that. But as time goes on, I realize that I am getting over it. Anyway, as you can see, I've tried to fix myself up. I don't think that I'm the man you thought so little of when you took up with Bruce. I've also started dating after we divorced. You can take care of your gentleman friend for as long as you want, but I think it's time to end this. If for no other reason, so you can start to rebuild a relationship with your kids. Chrissy started crying at that point and left the room. Dr. Patterson shared my sense of shock. When she had finally collected herself, she informed me that she wanted to see Chrissy alone the following session and myself alone the last. I sighed in agreement. I was enraged and full of hate when Chrissy unloaded all of this on me. But now, months after it happened, I was simply exhausted. I could see the suffering this whole thing was causing for Chrissy, her parents, and most importantly, our kids. I wished for that to end. I was also over my anger that Chrissy was seeing another man for sex. After my last meeting with Dr. Patterson, I was relieved that the counseling would be coming to an end and that Chrissy wouldn't be joining me. Dr. Patterson started, Ron, I want to commend you for your restraint through all these sessions. I know this entire situation has been unbelievably painful for you. After meeting with Chrissy last week, I think I finally understand what happened to your wife. I was perched on my chair's edge now. Maybe at last I would find out why Chrissy chose to ruin our marriage. Do you remember the homework I gave you? She said. All I did was nod. I had gotten rid of it and assumed it wouldn't have mattered much during these therapy sessions. Pulling 2 pieces of paper out of her folder, Dr. Patterson said, "I was surprised by how you both answered one specific question. The question was, if you could change one thing, what would it be? Do you remember that?" I gave a nod. "You answered that you wished you could have been a better husband so that your wife wouldn't have stopped loving you." When Chrissy heard that, she broke down and cried harder than ever. It took me quite a while to calm her down. I didn't know what to think or say or do, so I just sat there. "Ron, your wife never stopped loving you." "Yeah, that's why she continues sleeping with Bruce," I replied. Dr. Patterson scowled at me before letting out a sigh. "Ron, what I discovered about Chrissy was that she was going through a severe midlife crisis. As the children were getting older, Chrissy felt her life slipping away from her. She is, and I suspect she has always been, a warm and caring person. Somewhere along the line, she found Bruce, who needed her terribly. She confused her desire to be young again and Bruce's terrible need for forgiveness over his wife's death for love. I objected, saying that doesn't change anything. She's still sleeping with Bruce." "Actually, no, she's not, Ron." "Really? Then why didn't Chrissy tell me?" was my first thought upon learning of this. Inside, I know this isn't going to change your feeling at this point, but you need to know the whole truth. Bruce left town the same day that you told Chrissy that you were going to start dating and that you just wanted to get on with the divorce. She figured that she had already lost you. That crossed my mind, but Dr. Patterson was correct. My opinion remained unchanged. Too much had been said and done to turn back now. Now that my life was back on track, I was ready to go. It was impossible for me to trust Chrissy ever again, and I didn't want to live in that kind of world. Apart from anything else, though, my main reason for wanting it was to hopefully re-establish the children's bond with their mother. Since the beginning of this whole mess, Sally's grades had declined significantly, and I had no doubt that she was still upset with her mother. Kyle was acting out at school and had turned gloomy and reclusive. This was possibly Chris's worst result from her actions. The best-mannered of them all was Ron, who avoided talking about his mother whenever her name came up in conversation. I could be mistaken, maybe he reacted worse than the 2 girls, I'm not sure. Dr. Patterson, as she took out the second piece of paper, said one last thing to Ron. "This is Chris's answer to the question about changing one thing." She wrote, "If I could change one thing, it would be that I never met Bruce Hartman." Following the divorce, Chrissy used to visit the children on Wednesdays and Fridays in accordance with the terms of the agreement. I promised myself that I would take the kids out for dinner on Friday before Chrissy got here. We had very formal and awkward interactions with the kids at first, but eventually we began having a meal or 2 together. And then Chrissy asked me if she could stay the night one evening. "No," I laughed in response. "The bed in the spare room isn't all that comfortable. It's better if you just go back to your place." And never imagined that we would be in the same room alone the next time. Regarding Bruce Hartman, it appears that his account is not entirely accurate. His wife found him cheating on her and drove off in a fit of rage, which is how she passed away. She was killed in a car accident while speeding. I questioned, why did he leave town? I guess it was due to a severe beating that he took outside a local bar. 5 broken ribs, 1 busted kneecap, 5 missing teeth, and 2 busted nuts. I had to call in a favor with some friends. It was worth it. The beating will ensure that he is never going to be with any other woman, let alone please any. Regarding Chrissy, she managed to re-establish a loving bond with her kids little by little. Or perhaps I should put it this way, she brought Sally and Kyle back to a loving relationship. Regardless of Chris's actions, Ron and her seemed to be separated at all times. Although Sally was the first to welcome her mother's return, I would have assumed that she would be the one harboring resentment. Though, like Ron, there was a slight coolness with her father. Chrissy had finally patched things up with her parents. In any case, we would typically eat dinner there on Sundays as a family, but we weren't. Chrissy apologized profusely to me for all that had transpired. At last, I asked her to stop. I'll never be able to forgive her, and trying won't help. Just to add on, I replied, "Oh please, Chrissy, stop being so childish. I told you how things are going to be. I have no intention of arguing with you about it. The discussion is over, accept it or don't, that's your choice. We are never getting back together again, even if you were the last woman on the planet and the fate of mankind depended on me making love to you, I'll pass." I married after 3 years. It was an incredible experience to marry Sally's teacher. The kids are over her and have accepted her as a member of the family, which is what matters. The details of how we met and how it all transpired are another story. Chrissy is still refusing to acknowledge that I've moved on. I'm not going to take any action against her, though. The conversation was, after all, over. She chooses to accept it or not. Please feel free to express your opinions in the space provided for comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.